Jean. So this is should be the fun part, the stressful part's over, hopefully, and we can enjoy ourselves a little bit. My name is Jodie Ginsberg, I'm the London Bureau Chief for Reuters. And I chaired the Orwell Shortlist Prize Debate this time last year. It was the first ever televised leaders debate. We actually didn't think we'd get anyone here. In fact, the room was full to bursting because everyone wanted to stay to watch that debate. And I think very few people then would have predicted the kind of year that we've seen in the past year. We've had the spectacular rise and then fall of Nick Clegg, a rather unexpected coalition, a new Labour leader, the other Miliband brother. And I think if that tells you anything, that it's if a week is a long time in politics, then a year is a complete age. Things move at a very, very different pace for the royal family and for the monarchy and in royal affairs. We've had the same monarch for the best part of the last 60 years, and we're having a wedding on Friday, for which I've just pulled out the Reuters archive for 1947. To all intents and purposes, with a few tweaks here and there and a few countries that now have different names, you could pretty much transpose back to 1947 all of the events that are happening on Friday, and it wouldn't look very different at all. So, with that in mind, I think it's probably a good time to ask, is it time to make monarchy history? And we've got a great lineup of panellists. That reminds me, sorry, I should have said that at the beginning. I know plenty of you will want to tweet and blog while this is happening. Could you please switch your phones to silent? Sorry, I didn't mean to use you as a perfect example. The gentleman in the second row. But if you do also want to be singled out, please could you switch your phones to silent now? I'd be very grateful, and so with the panellists. I don't propose, you've got biographies of all the panellists in your excerpt pamphlet. I don't propose to rehearse those here. However, each of the panellists is going to get a few minutes to give their version of their side of the debate before we open it up to questions and a debate from the panel. However, before we do that, Jean has asked me to take a little vote, a straw poll from the floor before we start the debate, to get a sense of those who feel that it's time to make monarchy history and those who feel that the monarchy's time is still now. So all those who believe that it is time to make monarchy history and we should do away perhaps with the monarchy, please raise your hands now. Slightly, yes, I'd say only less than a third, possibly. Okay, that's interesting. Let's see if the panellists can change their mind. So, to my very far left is Gerry Stoker from the University of Southampton. He's going to kick things off. Next to him is Peter Hitchens. We have Sunder Katwala on my left, then Iain McLean and Joan Smith, and they're going to kick us off with some thoughts on whether it's time to make monarchy history. So, Gerry, could you start us off?
I can. And what I'm going to do is ask you a question as well. My question is even more subtle than the previous question that you've been asked, which is, can you just by a show of hands tell me how many of you actually know the third verse of the United Kingdom national? A few. Well, the answer is I do. And the reason why it's really something we should insist on being sung every time is that it points out perhaps the crucial thing about monarchy, which is that it is a constitutional monarchy, because it starts off, as you would imagine, in a very pleasant way, talking about, and I'm not going to sing it, you'll be glad to know, the choicest gifts in store on her, be pleased to pour, long may she reign. But this is the kicker. May she defend our laws and ever give us cause to sing with heart and voice, God save the Queen. So what that is trying to point out is that she, or the monarch, is a monarch, but they're there because they are part of a constitutional monarchy. So I think my starting point for this discussion is that we should be talking about a role rather than a person, and the role is the role of the constitutional monarch. What does a constitutional monarch consist of? Well, basically it's somebody who has their position by way of human rules rather than by, say, divine right. Their position is in part hereditary, but it's also partly contractual, as that verse makes plain, as indeed the oath of the monarch makes plain when they take their oath, which is if they break the rules of the British Constitution, then they're no longer monarch. They aren't acceptable, except insofar as they obey the rules. And their powers, of course, are very limited. You could honestly say that a constitutional monarch reigns rather than rules. And the constitutional monarch must take advice, and all of their key powers are now overwhelmingly held by elected politicians. And although they can offer their own opinions, occasionally in private, and they can occasionally warn a ruling government about what it's doing, their only real powers come at the time of a changeover of government, and most of their conventions are incredibly obscure and unknown, but fundamentally the whole idea is to try and avoid the monarch being involved in anything resembling a political decision. So why would you have such a role? And I think that it goes to the heart of the choice that we need to make, because in almost all democracies there's a split between the head of state and the head of government. The head of state quite often represents the kind of powerless, dignified, but nevertheless important part of the Constitution. The head of government is the person who's democratically elected, but also has the prime power because they are the ones that actually can be held to account. So the monarchy has a formal, ceremonial and symbolic role, and it's perhaps that final symbolic role representing the country as a whole which we also need to think about too, because if you don't have the monarch in that role, then you've got to think about how you construct a head of state to perform that role. Now, there are many ways in which, as I'm sure we'll hear, you can do that. But I suppose my initial contribution to the debate is to say it's got to be framed in the context of a rule of, or a way of working within a constitutional democracy. And there is a role that the monarch currently plays, and if you're going to replace the monarch, then you've got to be clear that the replacement would be better performing the role that you're talking about.